Hello and welcome to episode 9 of Market Values, the Transfermarkt podcast that likes to discuss all the biggest talking points in European football and across the rest of the world. And along the way, we like to check in on the market values of the biggest stars in the sport. As ever, I'm joined by my co-host, Manu Vet. Manu, how are you doing? Hopefully you're doing a little better than me. Hopefully users can't hear this and listeners can't hear this, but I'm a little bunged up with a summer cold. Can you believe it?
Summer cold, yeah. I mean, it is summer. I'm probably going to join you soon. Dropped off my little one at daycare today, and his nose was running. So, and whatever he gets, I will get too. That's how it goes, right?
It is how it goes. I thought I had the usual kind of summer allergies, and then it developed into a full-blown cold. So, you know, there's that, which is great fun. Fortunately, though, Manu, listeners won't have to hear too much of me in this week's show because you have done the heavy lifting. On this week's show, we do go to Spain, where I sit down with our Spanish football expert, Ivan Fuente, to discuss Barcelona's imminent league title, which could get wrapped up in very dramatic fashion this weekend when they take on Real Madrid. We discuss all things to do with Barcelona. Hansi Flick's 4th out of 4 league titles in his managerial career since stepping down from Germany's national team. And we discussed the 4 biggest players, the 4 most intriguing players who've kind of helped Flick and Barcelona to the league title. So that was my job this week. I spoke to Ivan, but you went to Portugal and you went to Germany. And so why don't you let listeners know what's in store in this week's show?
Not physically. I wish I had gone to Portugal. No, I spoke to our colleague Gonzalo about Porto's win. Very impressive win, Liga Portugal win. Last weekend they wrapped up the title in extremely convincing fashion, and the key players that made that happen for them, and the transfer policy that was behind it. So that was a really good talk. And then I spoke to our colleague Leonard from the German team about Victor Boniface, the rise and quick demise of Victor Boniface. One of the most remarkable market value curves you will find, or graphics you will find on our site, Victor Boniface. So going in depth on a fascinating player profile. So yeah, that was really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I found both conversations really, really interesting. So I think users and listeners have been for a real treat there. And yeah, you're right. Boniface is such an interesting one. I feel like on last week's show, we did a lot of talk about players who are rising in market value this season. And unfortunately, Boniface is one of the players who've lost the most market value over the course of Europe's top leagues this season. So it's definitely a story worth discussing. And you and Leonard did a great job of breaking down what's happened to him at Werder Bremen and Bayer Leverkusen. But Manu, as we do now like to do at the start of every show, we like to dive into the market value forums. And since we were in Spain, Portugal and Germany, almost forgot there, on this week's show, we thought we'd take a look at the Serie A market value forum. And I want to jump in here first. We've got 3 players we want to discuss and what users are saying about the market values. And I want to jump in first with one of my compatriots, Lewis Ferguson, because he was Mr. Bologna a couple of years ago, a star player, attacking midfielder who could have even rivaled Scott McTominay in prominence and pride from my nation of Scotland. But it's all gone a wee bit pear-shaped for him in Bologna, and unfortunately our users have been in the forum chatting about his market value. One user said that injury he picked up a while back seems to have derailed his career. At this point, I don't know if he'll ever be able to return from that level. One says his prolonged absence and his return not quite back to full fitness weren't good news for Bologna, but unfortunately the season hasn't gone to plan. He needs to be dropped. And another user says, I'm really sorry because he was an incredibly talented player, but after his injury, he never managed to get back on his previous level. He's really struggled this season in particular. So Ferguson has a market value right now of 18 million euros. It was once at a high of 28 million euros, about this time last year, actually. And our average suggestion from users, and it's worth noting here for anyone who doesn't know, you can go on to Transfermarkt. You can go to any player profile and vote on what you think the market value should go up, down, stay the same. And then you can jump into the market value forums and give a more detailed explanation if you'd like. And the average user suggestion suggests that his market value should go down by about 2 or 3 million euros. And Manu, I probably have to agree with the users on this one. It breaks my heart because I think Ferguson's a great player. I actually interviewed him for Transfermarkt. I spoke to him not that long ago, last year I think it was, or the year before, about his rise from Hamilton, which is just outside Glasgow, and Aberdeen. And he's kind of part of this kind of like footballing dynasty in Scotland. Ferguson's obviously a very famous name, but not just Alex Ferguson. There's Duncan Ferguson, Barry Ferguson as well, who people may know as well. So there's that kind of, he's kind of footballing royalty in Scotland, so people pay a lot of attention to him. But I think it's interesting how his season has kind of plateaued, or his time in Bologna has plateaued. I think you could suggest that perhaps, injury has played a part, but if I could maybe add something else to it, I would say that maybe the kind of evolution of Bologna as a club has maybe changed things as well. When I spoke to him, he had so much praise and admiration for Thiago Motta when he came to the club and kind of developed Bologna's tactics and system, and he really thrived under Motta. He actually got 13 goals and 5 assists in 65 games, I think it was, for Bologna in all competitions under Motta. Since he's been replaced by Vincenzo Italiano, Ferguson's role at Bologna has kind of really changed. He's gone from being this kind of attacking box-to-box player who likes to get on the edge of the box, maybe be the last kind of late runners into the box to kind of get onto chances and create chances, and he's maybe turned more into kind of more physical defensive midfielders. So I think that's played a part in why he's maybe his stats aren't maybe as convincing. He's gone from being an attacking player with lots of goals and assists to maybe a more defensive all-rounder. But I do generally agree with the users that say maybe he hasn't quite been the same since his injury. And he's always talked about maybe wanting to move to England at some point to kind of prove himself. And I just kind of wonder maybe a move this summer might be the best thing for him, because it feels as though he and Bologna have maybe gone as far as they can. Yeah, I think it'd be a really interesting one to keep an eye on. He'll almost certainly be going to the World Cup with Scotland, where he'll probably be a starter after somewhat being frozen out at some point by Steve Clarke for other players, but he's kind of elbowed his way into that team for sure. So he'll be at the World Cup for Scotland, and he could certainly turn around his market value with some strong performances there. But Manu, you've actually got another national team player close to where you live, who's also played in Serie A and has also attracted quite a lot of attention in the market value forums.
Yeah, he has Christian Pulisic, US men's national team winger. I mean, such a big summer coming up for him, right? You mentioned the World Cup. The United States are one of the 3 host nations of the tournament. He remains their biggest star. It's not even arguably. That's just how it is. It's factually accurate. But he arrived at AC Milan in 2023. From Chelsea, right? At the lowest point of his market value, 25 million euros, the lowest point of his market value since 2017, right? So the tail end of his Chelsea career really kind of petered out. His market value continued to drop, and then he joined AC Milan, and he found a lot of his ability to be dynamic and direct and attacking and fun to watch. A lot of that was regained, and his market value started to rebound, right? All the way up to 60 million euros in 2025, in October 2025. And that was the high point, right? And at that point, he was actually the most valuable player, not just most valuable US men's national team player, but the most valuable player in CONCACAF period, or like exceeding Alphonso Davies, who very much for the longest time was the benchmark in the region. But it's kind of the problem with Pulisic for a very long time has always been injuries, whether it was at Dortmund, whether it was at Chelsea. He's never had the ability to stay fit for really long stretches. At Milan, he seemed to have overcome that until he didn't, right? And this has been a really big issue this year. It's 28 games now, 8 goals, 3 assists. The numbers are dropping. And when you look at the comments, at the market value forums where people are saying it should be going down even further to 43.5 million. He's at 50 million euros right now. Bon F89 says, apart from a couple months, it's been a dreadful season. Value on decline at almost 28 euros, currently valued between 40 and 45 million. You know, so then user Inge Veron says he's still productive despite having injuries, and his market value should be higher. But that doesn't seem to be the consensus in the forum. I do think the funny thing is with Pulisic has always been that fitness issue, right? He's such a direct player. He's very much reliant on being dynamic, and when one or two of those things are not working out for him, he just doesn't have the ability to be productive. And I also do think that his directness is something that works really well for him, but is also it can be very much a thing that can be calculated by opponents, right? They know the way he plays. So, obviously he's still a top star. He's one of AC Milan's most important players when he's fit. But I do also wonder what's going to be next for his career, right? There has been rumors about him going back to England, but there's also been rumors, Stefan, about whether MLS should be dishing out all the money in the world to bring him home, right? There's always been that movement of having the biggest US stars playing in MLS, which makes sense. You want the biggest stars of your country to play in your own country, but I don't know if that really makes sense for him. So he's, I think, very much at a crossroads. He has to play a good World Cup, and then has to figure out whether staying at Milan and remaining fit and playing in Serie A is the right thing for him. I am a little bit doubtful on whether a more physical league like Premier League or even Bundesliga, considering his problems of injury, would be a good move for him.
Yeah, for sure. In fact, it's really interesting that everything you just explained there in the last kind of moment or two sums up maybe the next player we want to talk about, who's also an AC Milan winger, who also maybe has to leave AC Milan, which is interesting because Milan haven't been terrible this season. They've not been great. Obviously, they're well off the pace in terms of catching their cross-city rivals, not even cross-city, actually cross-stadium rivals in Inter Milan, but they're still third in Serie A. And of course, I'm talking about Rafael Leão, who's another player who's attracted a lot of interest in the market value forums, and is a third player we wanted to talk about on this segment, actually. One user says, an inconsistent player whose head isn't in the game. A few seasons ago, I would have paid over 100 million euros for him. The shooter's obviously got a lot of money, but now I don't think he's worth more than 50. Another says, I completely agree. I don't think he's a first-team regular for any Champions League side these days, so it's going to be difficult to get 50 million euros for a player who's no longer in his prime. Another user said he's massively overrated. People have been waiting for him to come into his own for years to no avail. He's technically mediocre, inconsistent physically. He's useless in defence and only comes to life once every couple of matches with one or two bursts of pace. And on and on and on a discussion goes. One user gives 3 reasons why his market value should drop quite significantly. They say performances, high salary, and age. At 27, he remains a viable asset, but is no longer considered a young talent worth betting on, but rather a player who must deliver immediate results. If he doesn't make an impact in Serie A today, in the league that matters, no one wants to pay for those wages just to send him to the stands. So, Manu, Rafael Leão's got a market value of 65 million euros. His peak was 90 million euros. Which lasted until June 2024. The average suggestion from users would be almost 20 million euro deduction in his market value. When you look at his stats, it's not hard to see the justification for that. Once upon a time, this is a player who was, getting 20, 25 goals and assists in Serie A every season. Right now, he's sitting on 12. Maybe like Pulisic, a player who's done okay in patches, but maybe lack consistency. And I think maybe the proof may be in the pudding here when we take a look at the players he's been linked with, the clubs that he's been linked with in recent years. Over the course of 2024 and 2025, he was linked to Bayern Munich, Barcelona, Chelsea, Real Madrid, PSG. You then look at towards the tail end of the window, it was Besiktas, Al Nassr, Galatasaray, and actually since the turn of the year and in 2026, only one club have actually been consistently linked with him on our market value. Not market value, on our rumour mill, and that's Manchester United. And I think that's quite a speculative report, to be honest. Sometimes the market does kind of flush out a lot of the kind of discussion here. And it would seem with Rafael Leão, Manu, we're talking about a player here who 2 or 3 years ago was really hot property, and as such his market value reflected that. But I think AC Milan may struggle to find a suitable buyer for him if they do want to sell him this summer.
Yeah, although I think his physicality, he's a big guy, right? Meter 88, we have listed him, so 6'2", does make him a good Premier League target in many ways, right? He's a big guy. He has the ability to be, when he's fit, that is a big when and if, then he has that ability to be really impactful. I have to say, I have seen him a couple of times live in stadium, and I just kind of thought, meh, at the time. So, and that was, when his market value was significantly higher than it is now. And I remember at the time, we did quite a bit of reporting on his Bayern Munich links, and they ended up signing Luis Diaz instead, who I think significantly better player. In many, many different ways. And I think, that is the kind of competition he's up to, right? Like up against and is compared to, right? He obviously has all the tools. He has the physicality to be successful in a more physical league. But it's just not, we've seen in the past, he has put it together, but he hasn't put it together in a while. And that is really something that is concerning, considering, this is a player, when I remember talking about this with Yatin Dietl, whenever I write all the English market value texts, right? And so I spoke to our Italy's area manager, Yatin Dietl, about him. And he, at the time, he's like, yeah, this is a player. He has the potential to be a €100 million plus player down the road, right? And Yatin is a guy who really knows his players and has a good eye for players. He doesn't say something like that flippant. And so what I mean to say that is that the potential was there. Maybe perhaps still is, but it's just not, for whatever reason, he's not being able to translate it onto the pitch.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, he turns 27 this summer, and I think it'd be really interesting to see what happens to him in the summer transfer window, because it strikes me as maybe the last opportunity for him to get that big move away from AC Milan. Well,
I do think that what happens with Portugal is going to be playing a really big role here, right? In my mind, I watched Portugal last summer at the UEFA Nations League's finals, where they were very, very good and won the tournament, the mini tournament, right? And among those 4 countries that were in it, France, Germany, Portugal, and Spain, they looked like the best of bunch. They didn't necessarily have the best players, but they looked the most like a team. And that, if with that in mind, I do think Portugal will play a huge role at the World Cup this summer. Maybe even a sleeper to win it, right? His sleeper, maybe that's even, I wouldn't even say that's true. They are a team that could definitely win it. And so if they win the World Cup, favorites. Yeah, they might be, they really might be. Like the individual pieces, are very, very good. And so if they win the World Cup and he plays a big role, I can see someone pay €100 million, no problem.
Yeah. Well, do you know what, Manu? You've expertly lined up the perfect segue there for me, because we have to wrap up this intro and get on to let the experts do the talking. And I think we should do exactly that. But before I do, I should also say, if you want to have your say on what these players' market value should be in any player, as always, head to Transfermarkt, click on forum, click on market value analysis, and you can fill your boots and spend all day long there digging through the forums and player forums and club forums and league forums. It's an endless labyrinth of football discussion, unlike anywhere else on the internet, that's for sure. But Manu, we're going to get going and crack on with the show, and I think we'll get started in Portugal, in Porto, where you sat down with Gonzalo to discuss their league title win.
And I'm now joined by Gonzalo Tristão Santos, my colleague from Portugal. You had a really busy weekend as well, as Porto celebrated winning the title, right? So that meant you were on shift. It's a big success for the club. What has it been like for Porto winning the title?
Yeah, so I think that this title was very important to Porto for very different reasons. The first one being that um, talking about the big three clubs in Portugal, so Porto, Benfica, and Sporting, Porto was the one who haven't won the league for the most time. They weren't champions since 2022, so 4 years without winning the league title. That's a lot for a club like FC Porto, but they now managed to win the league, and I think that one of the keys of Porto's success this season was the way they performed at the Transfermarkt, not only in the summer transfer window, but also in the winter transfer window. I mean, in the summer, and we have to remember this, Porto has a new coach, or had a new coach in the beginning of the season, but also had almost an entirely new team. They bought a lot of new players. They also sold some players that were in the team last season. And so with the new coach and with the new team, they still managed to win the league. And even more surprisingly than that, maybe, is that Porto has done or has achieved the best first half of the league in the history of the Portuguese league. They won 16 out of 17 matches, so they made 49 out of 49 points out of 51. And like I said, they had a new manager and a new team, a lot of new players, and they still managed to start the season very strong, to win the matches against Braga and Porto and Sporting. So the only match they drew in the first half of the league was against Mourinho's Benfica. So yeah, I was really surprised because, like I said, new manager, new team, and they still managed to win a lot of games, and in the end, they managed to win the league. So it was a fantastic team, fantastic season. I mean, to them, and I think they really deserve this title.
I mean, 85 points now after 32 games.
Yeah, and
9
still 2
points
games
ahead of
to go.
Benfica. Yeah, it's an incredible record. They could end
Mhm.
the season with 91 points. So that shows you just the dominance that they had over the Portuguese the league this year, right? And as you mentioned, there's always two competitors as well with Benfica and Sporting. How surprised were you that they won the title this year?
Very surprised. I mean, if you asked me that question like 1, 2, or maybe 3 months ago, I wouldn't be so surprised. But if you asked me that in the beginning of the season, I wouldn't say Porto was the favorite to win the title because, as I said before, they had a new manager and a lot of new players. So I was expecting them to take a little longer to achieve success. But the truth is that they bought so many good players, and Farioli just showed us that he's a very good manager, and the work was so well done that, like I said, in the beginning of the season, I think no one was expecting Porto to win the league, or at least to win the league this way, with still 2 matches to go. Like you said, with 85 points in 32 matches, I think no one was expecting this, but they were really, really strong. And so yeah, I was surprised at the beginning of the season, but not anymore, because they just showed that they were the best team. They were clearly better and more consistent than Benfica and Sporting. And so after we saw them play along the season in the last months, after that it was not a surprise anymore that Porto won the league, and it was just a matter of days to see Porto winning the league.
I mean, it's also impressive because they lost both Luke de Jong and Samu Ajewo with injuries. Samu in particular, a player that has been listed on the transfer market, as a potential player to leave. And his market value has skyrocketed over the last few years. And to lose both these players, experienced strikers, and still end up winning the league I think is a testament on how deep the squad was.
Yeah, and I really think that one of the keys to Porto's title was the way they performed in the transfer market. I mean, If you look at Porto's squad, they started the season with 3 strikers, Samu, Luke de Jong, and Danish. And Luke de Jong was injured for the whole season already in the first months of the season. And so they decided to bought another striker in the winter transfer window, which was Tarem Moffi. And then some weeks later, Samu also got injured. So and at that moment, we saw how important it was to buy a new striker in the winter transfer window, because they now had Danish and Moffi to the rest of the season. Of course, that Danish and Moffi are not so good as Luke de Jong and especially Samu. Samu is Porto's best striker by far. But for instance, if we look at Sporting, who was fighting with Porto for the title until some point of the season, maybe until April. Sporting only had 2 strikers in their squad, and then one of them, Ioannidis, gets also injured until the end of the season, and so they had to play almost every match with the same striker, which is Luis Suarez, who had a great season. As you know, he's Gyökeres replacement in Sporting, and he did surprisingly well. I mean, I'm not saying that Sporting fans don't miss Gyökeres anymore. Of course they do, but the truth is that the way Sporting managed to replace him was very good, but I think they failed in buying another striker. Porto did that, and I think that's one of the keys for their success, because they had in the beginning of the season 3 strikers, one gets injured, they buy another one, and then Samu gets injured as well, and they still have 2 strikers. These 2 strikers, as I said, Gul and Moffi, they don't score a lot of goals, but they were really, really useful. And I think they were key of the part of the success of the team this season.
Another player who was signed this season is Oskar Piotrzewski. We spoke in the past about him, the young Polish winger, 17 years old. I mean, his market value has already skyrocketed. I assume this, with what he's shown now in Portugal in the second half of the season, that market value is only going to accelerate even more.
Yeah, I mean, he's so young, 17 years old, and when Porto bought him in the winter transfer window, I really thought that he was going to start in the B team, in the secondary team. But the reality is that now he's a starter for FC Porto, and no one thinks that he should not be a starter. I mean, he just gained his place in the team in a way no one was expecting, because Porto had has good players for that position. But the truth is, even if Piotrzewski is so young, he's only 17 years old, he came to Portugal prepared to play for the first team, and he also scored very important goals. He made a lot of assists. He was a very important player for FC Porto this season. I mean, for me, the Porto's winter transfer window was almost perfect. They bought not only Piotrzewski, who now is a regular starter for the team. They also bought Moffi, the striker I was talking about before, which was also very important for them. They bought Thiago Silva, although his age, he's a very good center back still, and he was a starter in a lot of matches of Porto in this second half of the season. And then they bought another player, Seko Fofana, who is not a regular starter, but he also scored very important goals and also helped Porto winning the title. So the way Porto performed in the winter transfer window this season, for me, was key for their success and for their winning the league. It was an amazing transfer window for the club. Players like Fofana and Moffi, they are actually on loan at the club. I don't think they will stay at Porto for the next season, but they helped a lot winning the league this year. So I think they were amazing signings for Porto.
But it wasn't just in the winter, right? I mean,
Right.
the one name that really stands out as well is Victor Froholt, the midfielder who they signed from Copenhagen ahead of the season. Since he arrived with a market value of 12 million euros. That's gone up to 22 million euros then in September. And then again in December, he went to 30 million euros.
Yes.
He is Copenhagen's record sale. Obviously, Porto have had many other players that they signed for the 20 million euro range, but he seems like a real bargain now too. When you look at his statistics, 6 goals and 5 assists in Liga Portugal, I mean, he's been a tremendous signing for them.
Yes, and I think his current market value of 30 million euros, it's now very short for what he's showing in the Portuguese league. So I'm pretty sure that at the end of the month, we're going to upgrade him and to upgrade his value a lot, because in my personal opinion, he was the best player in the Portuguese league this season. And so it was also, therefore, the best signing of the season. It's just an amazing player. He arrived at Portugal with 19 years old. He's now 20 years old. And he's just, I don't know, Froholt, it's that very complete midfielder that seems to be everywhere in the pitch. He does everything and he does it very well. So, yeah, it was an amazing signing for Porto. I'm not saying he's the best player in the Portuguese league, but this season specifically, he was the best player, probably the most decisive player to Porto's success this season. So, Porto had an amazing winter transfer window. They had also an amazing summer transfer window. But when we talk about Froholt, we are talking about the best signing of the league, in my opinion, and of course, the best signing of Porto this season. So, yeah, I was really surprised with the way he played. I also had my doubts about Froholt being a starter this season, but I mean, there's absolutely no doubts now. My only doubt now is that if Porto is going to be able to keep him in the squad for next season. Maybe the biggest European clubs will think that he still needs another season in the Portuguese league, and Porto next season is going to play the Champions League, and that's very important for them as well. So let's see what kind of offers Porto will receive for him in the summer, because I think Porto will receive a lot of offers for him. Let's see if those offers are enough to convince Porto to let him go. I think he has 80 million euros release clause, and I wouldn't be surprised if a club could reach maybe not 18 million euros, but a very high fee to try to sign Froholt, because he was just amazing all this season.
Yeah, I mean, 80 million euros would be also good news for Copenhagen, as they have a 10% sell on, so they would love that. Another player who really impressed, he arrived from Saudi Arabia in June 2025, so also last summer. Scored 3 goals and 9 assists, and that's Gabri Vega, Porto's number 10. At least that's the jersey number he wears, and returned from Saudi Arabia to European football, and his market value as a result has rebounded. He had a high market value of 30 million euros at one point. It's now at 25 million euros, but has gone up since he's been back in Portugal. And I assume Gonzalo, he's another player whose market value will continue to rise, considering the way he's been playing.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think if you remember, Gabri Vega was one of the most promising Spanish players when he was at Celta de Vigo some years ago. And I think we were all very surprised because he was so young and decided to move to Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
Usually players that go there are older, but Gabri Vega decided to make that step when he was just like 20 or 20 years old. Yeah, it was surprising, but he then decided to return to Europe, and I think it was the best decision for his career. He was also one of the best players of Porto this season, and I think we will recognize this name, Rodrigo Mora, who is also one of the most promising Portuguese players, and specifically Porto players. Last season, Rodrigo Mora performed very well, and everyone was thinking that this was going to be the season where Rodrigo Mora was going to explode and going to play so well that then he will move to a top European club. But the thing is that with this new coach, Francisco Farioli, Porto plays with more physicality than creativity, you know. And Gabri Vega is a very creative player, but he also has this physical dimension that Rodrigo Mora still doesn't have, because Rodrigo Mora is so young, you know. But the truth is that Gabri Vega, right now, it's a better player, and like I said, everyone was expecting Rodrigo Mora to be one of the star players for Porto this season, but because of the arrival of Gabri Vega, that just didn't happen. Gabri Vega suits better the Farioli tactics, Porto style of play. And I think he was also one of the key players for this league's title for Porto. It's an amazing player. I'm surprised that he hasn't been called up for the Spanish national team recently. He probably doesn't have many chances to go to the World Cup, because the World Cup now is just 1 month or 1 month, some weeks away, so he will probably not be there. But I think he has done an amazing season, and probably one of the best Spanish players in the world nowadays.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one final name I was kind of curious about was William Gomez. He was signed last winter, and with last winter, I don't mean this last winter, the one before that.
From the
he
last
arrived from
season,
Sao Paulo. But has made tremendous progress as well. 8 goals, 1 assist in 26 games. Didn't play all the games, but his market value has also been on the rise. Is now at 20 million euros. When he first arrived, he was at 6 million and went to 9 million. I assume that was because of the transfer fee, right? But now at 20 million euros, he's another really interesting name if we can finish up on him.
Yeah, the thing with William Gomez is that I think that everyone here recognizes his potential and the quality that he already has. He's only 20 years old, so he's very young. But the thing is that he's not a regular starter at Porto, because Porto has amazing players, and it's difficult to be a regular starter in this team. But even playing a lot of matches from the bench, starting in the bench and then going to the pitch, he still has great numbers, as you were saying. So he's a very decisive player. He scored important goals in the first match against Sporting, in Sporting Stadium in Alvalade. He scored the winning goal against them. So yeah, I mean, William Gomez is that kind of player that at least me, I look at him and I say, this player could be a regular starter, but he's not, because of the quality Porto has in their squad. Still, I think he could be one of the key players of Porto next season. Of course, that we have to see who is Porto going to sell, who is Porto going to buy in the summer. But I think if William Gomez stays in the club, and I think he will, mainly because of what I was saying, because he's not a regular starter yet. So I don't think that Porto will receive like tremendous offers from other clubs for him. There are probably clubs that are going to keep an eye on him in the summer, but I don't think it's going to be enough to convince Porto to let him go. So maybe he will be even more important next season. Let's see.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Gonzalo. This was a great overview of what's going on with Porto and the tremendous season that they've been playing. And of course, as always, there's so many interesting names to keep an eye on. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. The pleasure was mine.
So there is a humongous game in Spain this weekend. You may know it as El Clasico. It is, of course, perhaps the biggest rivalry in all of European football, when Barcelona and Real Madrid lock horns. And anyone who listened to the show a couple of weeks ago will know that we discussed the prospect of the title being decided in that fixture. And so it's come to be. So we had to get our good friend Ivan Fuente from the Spanish team back on the show to discuss maybe not the game itself, Ivan, but Barcelona's coming title. They obviously could have won it the weekend there. They didn't because of results. Even if they don't go on and beat Real Madrid this weekend, it's more or less inevitable. We spoke about Real Madrid last time we had you on the show, so it only makes sense that we speak about Barcelona. So before we jump straight into, some of the interesting players, what have you made of Barcelona this season? This is Hansi Flick's second consecutive league title. I was checking actually that he's now won 4 league titles in a row from Bayern Munich to Barcelona, which is truly incredible. He's never lost a league title race actually as a manager. So have you made of Flick, and how have you made of Barcelona this season? And hello, how are you?
Hi, Stefan. Nice to be here again. And it's Barcelona is gonna win La Liga this season for sure. They only need 1 point more. And maybe not in the Clásico, but the next week probably he will get the title. I think they deserve the title because they've been the best team in the Spanish football this season. Also the last season, but this season I think Flick tried to push the team on a highest level, and for a while they did it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before I asked you to come on the show, I did ask you to put together 4 players who have embodied or perhaps characterized this Barcelona potential future title win. And we want to go through them on the show, obviously, to discuss them. And the first one is a player who I think a lot of people maybe outside of Spain maybe won't know of, and that is, of course, Juan Garcia, the goalkeeper. They signed him from Espanyol for 25 million euros. His market value has increased from 15 million euros to 40 million, increased by 50 million euros, I beg your pardon, to 40 million euros. And he's now the second most valuable goalkeeper in the world. So a goalkeeper who's come from a smaller club in Spain and, based on his market value, Ivan, has seemingly done very well at Barcelona this season.
Yeah, it's a really good goalkeeper. Just to describe him a little bit, he's really tall. It's almost 2 meters. I don't have the exact number now, but he's really tall, and he's good with his feet. He knows how to pass the ball, which is really important for Barcelona. Maybe he's not like Neuer or Marc-André ter Stegen, but he's really good. And also, he's a proper goalkeeper, let's say. Here in Spain, we say the goalkeeper has to first the first thing a goalkeeper has to do is keep his a clean sheet and then play the ball. But he does. He's a proper goalkeeper. He has a really good numbers. I think he has 14 or 15 clean sheet in La Liga now. So he's the one with more clean sheet. Yeah, it's the proper. I think Barcelona has found a proper keeper for a long time, because he's 25, I think.
Yeah, because obviously for the longest time, Barcelona had issues with goalkeepers. They obviously had Peña, they had Ter Stegen, Szczesny. They also brought in from loan. If I'm not mistaken, he came out of retirement, I think, to join Barcelona, or maybe from a small. Yeah, so obviously you could maybe say it was something that was overlooked when the squad was being built in terms of the importance. And so, do you think Garcia has come in and he's fixed a hole in that team that has been there for a number of years?
Yeah, because in a team like Barcelona, the keeper needs to save these balls like no one expect to be saved. I don't know if I explain myself. It's not just just save the easy one. No, you need to be focused during the 90 minutes, because Barcelona is gonna attack and it's gonna leave a lot of space in the back. So you need to be focused and save those difficult ones. And I think Joan Garcia is clearly a keeper that can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. The next name on the list is Fermin Lopez, who most people will probably know if they have some sort of interest in Spanish football. An academy player who's came through the ranks at Barcelona. His market value has increased by 50 million euros to 100 million euros. So his market value has essentially doubled this season, which is incredible. He's now the 3rd most valuable Spanish player in the world. He's the 5th most valuable attacking midfielder in the world, Ivan. Maybe for people who don't follow Spanish football, maybe they only see Barcelona 2 or 3 times in the Champions League every season. What kind of player is Lopez, and how impressive has he been this season for Barcelona?
Well, he's a player, like, he's really talented, but is this kind of player that you want to have in your team because he's talented, obviously, but he works a lot. He's always run and run and run and run, never give up. Also, there is a fact that after he was in La Masia, and then he moves to Linares, which is a team in the third division or fourth, I'm not sure now. But at that time, he was always working a lot, always focus on the games, doing a really good job. And a player had who played with him say that he at that time he already knows that he will be in Barcelona team at in the future.
Yeah, so he's obviously a player who's been developing at Barcelona for a long time. Do you think that hard work he does on and off the ball compensates for other players or makes the players around him a bit better? So I guess you could maybe, I think last time we actually discussed Gavi, for example, on one of the first shows we did, and his market value fall and how he struggled for game time at Barcelona because of injury and things. Has Lopez replaced Gavi in that Barcelona midfield? Maybe not specifically the same position, but maybe that energy and, as we would say in English, that industry or the grit that he has in midfield.
Yeah, he has this I don't know, this soul of a warrior that always push, always keep running, annoying the other team, the player who had the ball. So yeah, I think he's this kind of player like Gavi.
How important do you think he'll be for Spain this summer at the World Cup?
I think he's gonna be a key player.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the next player on the list is also another Spanish player who will probably be playing alongside Lopez for Spain at the World Cup, and that's, of course, Pedri, who really needs no introduction. Most football fans know exactly who Pedri is, and his market value increased by 10 million euros this season. That may not seem like a lot, but it means his market value is now 150 million euros. He's the joint third most valuable player in La Liga. There's only two players worth more, and he's the second most valuable player in Spain. One of the most valuable players in the world, Ivan, maybe the most valuable midfielder, or certainly one of them. And it certainly feels like Pedri has got back to being the player that we knew he was maybe 1 or 2 years ago. He's this world-class player, and has he been the engine? Has he been the key player for Barcelona in that midfield this season?
Yeah, and the main change I think Pedri has done this season is related with his physical condition. In the past, he had a lot of problems with his injuries. This season, he had a couple of injuries as well, but you can see how he has development his physical condition. I don't know if he knows better his body for sure. Maybe he has changed something in his lifestyle or in the way he trained. Maybe the flick and his staff control better the force Pedri does in the game. But I think he's now more consistent on the field because of that. He can do more efforts during the games without get injured.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the last player on the list, of course, is Lamine Yamal, who also needs no introduction. His market value hasn't changed this season, but he is, as many would suspect, our joint most valuable player in the world. I think it's Mbappe and Erling Haaland who are equal on market value with him. Ivan, we spoke about Mbappe on a recent show and discussed Lamine Yamal on a recent show and discussed what he has to do to maybe improve his market value above Mbappe and Haaland. And of course, unfortunately, he picked up a long-term injury, which has ruled him out for the rest of the season. Hopefully, he will be back for the World Cup for Spain. But prior to that injury, he looked as though he was maybe in the best form of his career, and he was ready to really kind of go on and win huge things for Spain and do lots of impressive things in 2026. What do you think has been the key behind his success for Barcelona this season? Do you think it's because he's just coming of age, or do you think there's something to do with the tactics or the management of Hansi Flick that is getting the best out of him?
I think he's growing. He's only 18 years old, and his career is just starting, I think. And obviously, with the year by year, he will reach, hopefully, a better level. And I think that happened this season. He's a better player than he was the last one. His numbers are better than it was. And I think he needs to keep improving in that point. He needs to score more goals because he's this kind of player that when he's on the field, you can feel like something is going to happen. He's a game changer, sorry. But he still needs to be a little bit better in a goals term, like score more goals per game. And if I have to say something about him, he has a problem, and the problem is that we still have fresh in our memories Messi and Cristiano, what he have done in the Spanish league, and we are always comparing him with them, and it's not fair.
Yeah. So do you think he still lives under that shadow of Lionel Messi to an extent? Is there any way for him to get away from that? Because I guess any player, it's almost like Cruyff before Messi, maybe. There was always going to be that comparison. Is there any way for Lamine Yamal to get away from that unless he was to somehow become better than Messi?
I don't think so. And if there is a way, I don't know what is. But it's like he's only 18 years old. He has scored, I don't know, maybe 20 goals or something in all the season. But we still want more. And it's not fair, I think.
Yeah, well, that's Barcelona for you, I suppose. If you want to play for Barcelona, you have to do what Barcelona want. But that's really interesting. And just finally, before I let you go, Ivan, the really interesting thing there is that all four of those players are relatively young. I know Garcia's maybe mid-20s, but for a goalkeeper, he's very young. I know Barcelona obviously have older players. They've got, Cancelo, Rafinha, Robert Lewandowski, but those four players strike me as being a very young spine for the team. So do you think going forward for the next 2, 3, 4 years, these are the four players who will be the stars for that Barcelona team going forward?
Yeah, maybe not to that level, that high level, but La Masia is, I don't know how to say that, it's like you always will find something useful there.
Yeah, absolutely. But we look forward to seeing who they could come up with next. They always seem to have a conveyor belt of new players each and every season. And 3 of these players, at least, are exactly perfect examples of that. But thank you so much for joining us on the show this week, Ivan. And I'm sure Barcelona will enjoy their title celebrations when they come. There's some other big stories in Spain that we do want to discuss, but we're also waiting to see how they play out before the end of the season. Maybe towards the bottom of the table. There's a little hint as to maybe what we could discuss in recent next weeks. And of course, we'll speak to you, I'm sure, before the World Cup. But thank you once again for joining us on the show, Ivan.
Thanks. See you soon.
And I'm now joined by Leonard Gans, part of the German editorial team at Transfermarkt and a Werder Bremen expert. Before we start talking about Victor Boniface, Leonard, how are you feeling about Werder at the moment? 6 points with 2 games to go. Is the gap to the relegation zone? How confident are you feeling that this is a done deal for you guys and you can celebrate the 2026-2027 Bundesliga season?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm kind of confident, like, as you said, 6 points ahead of the relegation zone. And on top, Wolfsburg and St. Pauli have a direct matchup on the last match day. And they play Bayern and Leipzig next weekend. So I think even if we lose both games, we can plan with Bundesliga football next season. I'm quite sure about that.
But the big question then is when you think about Werder Bremen and starting to plan Bundesliga football for next season, is Victor Boniface going to be part of those plans? I mean, he is, you're already shaking your head. He's unknown from Bayer Leverkusen, of course. Didn't quite work out for him. I mean, your immediate reaction is no. He suffered that really terrible injury into his loan, hardly featured for Werder Bremen this season, right? Just the 11 games, 2 assists, 326 minutes. It's been not a great stint for him at Werder.
Yeah, he came in with a very, very high expectations. Like, he was a deadline day signing, and every Werder fan was quite hyped after he was signed. Like, he just failed his medical at Milan, so that was the type of club you expected him to move, and then he fell through, and ended up going to Werder. He was the most valuable signing in club history, which is a pretty big thing. And yeah, we really had high expectations, but yeah, as you said, he had to deal with a lot of injuries and couldn't really live up to the expectations. For next season, I mean, he's just on loan, so he will go back to Bayern Leverkusen in summer, and I'm quite sure there's no chance that Werder will try again, because there's not really much a reason to do so.
Yeah, I mean, the injury history is well documented, isn't it? Started already at Leverkusen, and then at Werder Bremen he has missed 17 games with the cartilage damage in his knee, but then of course fitness issues and a cold. You mentioned the market value. I mean, when Leverkusen signed him from Union Saint-Gilloise in 2023, his market value quickly exploded to 40 million euros. It went then to 45 million euros, and then it dropped. It started dropping with the loan to Werder Bremen. He was still at 40 million euros when he joined. I mean, before we get to the really dramatic drop to the 5 million euros that he is at now, which is his lowest point when I look at his history since 2022. He has a really interesting market value graph, by the way. It goes up and it goes straight back down, and he's still young enough that it could go back up, only 25. But I remember in December 2025, so last year, there was these talks about him possibly going to Saudi Arabia, and the transfer fee that was discussed then was 70 million euros. Didn't happen. Played the second half of the season then with Bayer Leverkusen, because Al Nassr ended up signing Jean Duran. The Saudi clubs like to do this. They approach several clubs at the same time. They have one transfer fee in mind, and then they get the preferred target over the line. A really big hit for Leverkusen, right? Because it was a big transfer fee that they missed out on. But as you mentioned, Milan fell then through next. That was, I think, 20 million euros at the time that they were hoping for.
It was a loan with a buy option of 25, I think, and a loan fee of 5. So the total package was around 30 million. So way higher than they would get this summer, I think. Yeah.
And so that already less. And then the Werder Bremen loan was essentially free.
Yeah. I mean, it was to be expected that his market value will drop after the loan to Werder, because just Werder is not such a big club as Milan and Bayer Leverkusen, obviously. They were a mid-tier Bundesliga club for like the last 10, 15 years. They even got relegated. So every time you switch the clubs to a smaller club, you're expected to lose market value. So that was quite obvious. But then obviously his poor form and his injury problems didn't really help. And that he's at 5 million now is quite a statement, because, as you said, just 18 months ago, we talked about 70 million euros, and now he's at 5, so it's quite disastrous time for him.
Do you think that, I mean, the injury concerns, it's not just the injury, there's also the video that he took himself racing on the Autobahn, right? I mean, there is lots of stuff going on in the background. Do you think back when Werder Bremen decided on this, also add to the fact that he failed his medical at Milan, do you think that Werder Bremen just didn't see the risk that was involved in this transfer?
Yeah, you could definitely say so. I mean, they were a high risk, but on the other side, every time you have the opportunity to get such a high quality player as I said, mid-tier Bundesliga club, you kind of have to take the chance, I think, especially on a deadline day where everything is very quick and you have to decide in minutes. And then when you get the chance and you hear from another club that this player is available, then I think there's no other chance than signing him. But what I also had, what I also wanted to say is that, as you said, his not only his fitness problems were a thing, but also his mindset. Like every time he came back from an injury, you not only had the feeling that he was not fit, but also that his body looked out of shape and everything. And that's kind of a thing that also played a big part in his market value development, because you don't really have injuries can happen, but you don't really have the feeling that he can bounce back from an injury, because he looked so out of shape on the field that it's quite not. So nobody believes that he will find his form from 2023. It's quite not the best look for him right now.
What did Werder Bremen do anything to try to get him back on track? Because I mean, it's not an easy thing to convince a player that, hey, look, maybe you need to hit the gym every once in a while, or maybe you need to change your lifestyle away from the pitch. What did Werder Bremen try to do to maybe get this guy back on course?
I mean, at the beginning, it looked quite promising, to be honest. Like in his first game, he got subbed in and immediately gave an assist at a 4-0 win against Borussia Mönchengladbach. I remember that game because it was his first game. We won, and you really thought, okay, that's the beginning of a new era, and Boniface will be back in shape. But after that, he gave some interviews, and he looked like he would try everything possible to get back to his form. But I think, then he suffered some minor setbacks and didn't really bounce back from those. So he just lost focus, I think, in after those smaller injuries. And then he obviously suffered that big injury, and from that point on, he never really came back.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing. I mean, when he suffered this cartilage damage in December, that a lot of people thought that was it, right? He would just go back to Leverkusen. He wouldn't even play for Werder, but he's actually made the bench against Stuttgart. Didn't make the bench against Augsburg, but did make a bench against Stuttgart on match day 31. Did not feature at all on match day 32. Do you think we're gonna see him one more time in a Werder Bremen jersey?
I don't really think so. No, I mean, he was on the bench, but that was also due to some other injury problems in the squad. Our coach Daniel Thune even said that it doesn't really matter if he has 3 or 5 kilograms more on his body, because he can still score a header. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So he kind of talked himself into reasons to put him on the bench. But I don't really think. I mean, every time you see him on the training ground, he doesn't really look fit. And as soon as we have 18 available players besides Boniface, he will not make the squad again.
Yeah, I mean, that is the big question now, is what comes next, right? You look at his all-time stats on our site, the Transfermarkt. He scored 17 goals and 11 assists for Union Saint-Gilloise in 51 games. Before that, at Bodo Glimt, he scored 23 goals and 7 assists in 66 games. At Leverkusen, 32 goals and 12 assists in 61 games. It isn't like
player he was.
I mean, that's the remarkable thing. This was legitimately a really, really good player. He's one of the best players in German football, and his drop-off in performance and the injuries, of course, have been so remarkable. If you look ahead, do you ever think we're going to see that Victor Boniface again?
I mean, it's tough to tell, because he's not that old. I mean, he's 25 years old. Yeah, he's 25 years old. So you would think he has enough time to come back from that. But I mean, his striker partner at Leverkusen is a very good example, Patrick Schick. He also has to deal with a lot of injuries. They both played a key part in the championship season 2023. And as I said, they both have injury problems. But Patrick Schick scored a hat-trick last weekend, and he's back. You know he has those problems, but you also have the feeling he can work out of those. And as I said, you don't really have that feeling from Boniface. I don't know what the background is, like if he has like mental issues or if he has some other stuff to deal with. I don't know, and it's tough to tell from the outside. But yeah, that's, I think, the main reason why it doesn't really seem like he could be back in that form anytime soon.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see what Leverkusen are going to do with him, because he's going to go back. And just looking at his profile now, he's under a contract there until 2028. You know, there's definitely interest on their part to at least get something for him, right? Because they made a significant investment themselves when they originally signed him, 22.6 million, and they were hoping that they would be able to sell him with a profit, and it does not look like that at all.
I mean, Saudi Arabia probably still has an eye on him. I don't know, because the name alone probably is reason enough for some Saudi club to pay enough for Leverkusen to say yes, I assume. But I don't think, as you said, the setback it was winter 2024, I think, that where he should go to Al Nassr, and then they signed John Duran. Yeah, that was, I mean, the chance to sell him for Leverkusen, and that they missed out on that much money really will hurt them and their chances on the transfer market in the next years for sure.
It's an absolutely fascinating rise and fall of a player. I don't think, as I said, his market value curve, which you can find on every player's profile, is quite remarkable. I don't think I've seen a steep rise and steep drop off at many different players. Leonard, this was great. Thank you so much for coming on. The rise and fall of Victor Boniface.
Thanks for having me.
What happens next?
And one funny thing, it's not the only story about Werder Bremen, because we also had Naby Keita a few years ago, which had kind of a similar story. He came to Werder as a big name, and he made even less games than Boniface and fell off even more quickly. So it's kind of a Werder Bremen thing.
He went to Turkey, right? If I remember,
Budapest.
Naby Keita. Budapest.
Ferencváros Budapest. He's playing now.
That's right. Yeah,
but it's a kind of a similar story. So I hope we don't buy another big name next summer.
Werder Bremen, beware of big name signings.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Manuel.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for coming on.